Good morning, and welcome to San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Georgetown, Texas. My name is Mimi Ray, and I'm a member of the Sunday Service Committee. Whether you are a first-time or frequent visitor or a long-time member, we are happy you are here. Whether you are seeking community and spiritual growth, needing nurturing, exploring new ideas, or looking for comfort, we are happy that you are here. We all come from different places, religions, beliefs, and backgrounds. All are welcome here, as we are a welcoming congregation that is committed to inclusion of all, and a green sanctuary who works to mitigate our impact on the ecology. Please feel free to visit our website at sangabrieluu.org to learn more about us. We hope that you will find comfort, connection, and community during your time with us today. Thank you, and we hope you'll enjoy the service.
The lighting of the chalice. May the light of this chalice give light and warmth to our community when we are joyful, when we despair, and may we feel the warmth spread from our circle to wider and wider circles until all know they belong to one circle of life.
Greetings. Welcome to a worship service brought to you by the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. I am Reverend Sandra Ingham, this fellowship's interim minister. We hope that you will be able to tune in regularly to share our service with us. I am often the speaker, but we also have guest speakers regularly. Next week, Keith Hutchinson, one of this congregation's lay leaders, will be doing the service. Rain, 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 as I edited these remarks on Friday morning, the 4th of September. And wow, what a wonderful sound. Rain to me equals relief. I so miss rainy days. As we think about civility this morning, or whenever you are watching this service, think about how many outside influences affect the level of civility we are able to maintain in any one day. Think about the relentless heat that we slogged through for so many days, and we'll probably slog through a little bit more yet. Think about those levels of anxiety we now live under and would never have imagined, let alone the toll that we are taking on our mental, those anxieties are taking on our mental health day after day. The virus, the economic disaster, the legitimate protests, the overdue calls to dismantle the unjust systems under which we have been living for centuries. How can we be civil with and to each other when we are so worried about so many things? That is one reason to be a part of our community. We try to help with that. The opening words are by Unitarian Universalist minister Marta Valentine. We come together today to honor the universal community of seekers to which we all belong. We gather together today to share from our deepest place of safety, that we might nurture ourselves by celebrating one another. We call into our presence this hour our ancestors whose love, labor, and commitment made it possible for us to be here now. Let us call one another to the table of abundance, that we may feed on those fruits that sustain us and ever ask us to grow. Let us open to this moment with hearts that have no borders. I invite you now to join together in saying the words of the congregation's affirmation.
I'm Jackie Karish.
I'm Ron Karish.
We invite you to join us in saying the words of this congregation's affirmation, words that affirm our mission.
The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer.
To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Good morning, Karina. What is in the Wonder Box today? I know that you have a story about how hard it sometimes is to be civil or nice to each other when there can be so many things that make us grumpy, as in the family you're going to tell us about.
Thank you, Reverend Sandy, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. Let's see what's in our Wonder Box today. I have a great story to share with you, I think, but let's see if the Wonder Box can give us a clue as to what the story might be about. Any ideas, any guesses? Let's open it up. Look inside. You may not be able to tell what that is exactly. It's an umbrella, and believe it or not, this particular umbrella has been in the Wonder Box before. So it must be really important to the story if I want to use it again. Can you think that this story might be about a rainy day? If you do, then you're right. It is about a rainy day. The story is actually an older book called The Quarreling Book, but I have updated it for today's situation. So let's see. I'll start out by saying that once there was a family, they loved each other very much, and most of the time they enjoyed each other's company. Really, they did. But unfortunately, a virus came to town, and they all had to stay home all the time. Their parents worked their jobs from home, and the kids went to school on the computer, and they were together a lot. And that's a challenging situation, especially if you're in a grumpy mood. And that's what happened. It was a rainy day, and the rain just made everyone feel more stuck inside. One of the parents, I won't say which one, got particularly grumpy about this. And as they sat down in front of their laptop to go to their first Zoom meeting of the day. They didn't say, I love you to their partner and wish them a good day at work too, like they normally do. So that grumpiness got passed on. And when their son Nico set up his laptop on the dining table to go to class, another parent got all angry with them and said, go to your room instead. And even though Nico hadn't finished his breakfast, he wasn't supposed to take food into his room. So yeah, he was hungry and angry about this. So what happens then? He's in a bad mood and he yells at his sister Frankie for leaving the laptop unplugged all night, saying that he wouldn't be able to go to his class or that he'd be late, even though the charger was right there and it didn't matter. So then Frankie is in a bad mood for getting yelled at for no reason, and she stomps off up to her room to flop on her bed, and her dog is in there asleep on the bed, but she just pushes the dog off. And this is the crucial thing. This family has a dog. The dog is surprised, but just thought Frankie was playing. So he jumps up and down and wags his tail and pounces on her and starts licking her face, and that tickles, so she laughs. And she all of a sudden forgets that she's angry and she's in a better mood. And then later, when Nico comes into her room looking for a pencil, she offers her best one with the new eraser on it. Nico realizes that and is pretty grateful and says thank you and apologizes about the charger and says, you're right, it wasn't such a big deal that the laptop wasn't plugged in and I wasn't late to class. The parents overhear Nico and Frankie making up, and they're really impressed. And this puts them in a good mood, and they give each other a kiss. They apologize to each other and to Nico and Frankie for not recognizing that they were grumpy because of the rain. And by then, the rain had stopped. And so at lunch, they were able to take a walk around their neighborhood with their masks on. Getting out of the house did them all some good too. The end. So yeah, very different from this book, which has no internet. There's a lot that happens by telephone and other things in that book. Thank you for listening to my heavily adapted story, and I look forward to seeing you in RE time. We'll talk a little more about ways to recognize how we're feeling and what tools we can use to help us process those feelings. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karina. Because we cannot literally pass the offering plates when we are doing virtual services, there will be information on your screens during this musical interlude about how to give to the fellowship. And this information will be repeated during the postlude. Thank you, Jean. Take a few minutes now, everyone, to center yourselves in silence, followed by a brief breathing meditation. The reading I would like to share with you now was written by Marge Piercy, and she titled it, "To Be of Use." This is a tribute in honor of Labor Day, a poem about work. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing, well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. After writing the blurb about this week's service that would be in our newsletter, I put the words civil rest into the search engine of the internet because that's what we do now. I only found one reference to civil rest, and it only confused me. It seems to be a term used by a man named Erik Larson, or maybe S-E-N, not S-O-N, but not the writer Erik Larson, who's written some marvelous true stories, but rather an Erik Larson who may or may not be a college professor, but who seems to be a conservative Christian, perhaps even a fundamentalist, but not wanting to fall down the rabbit hole of spending way too much time on the internet trying to figure out who this Erik Larson is and why he was using my phrase, civil rest. I didn't pursue it. And I should have said before I told you all that the title of today's reflections is Civil Rest. We tend to forget, I think, when we have the 3 summer holidays, Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, that they aren't meant to be just holidays, excuses for picnics, barbecues, concerts, kicking off or ending the summer or marking the middle of it. They are intended to honor specific times and places in this country's history. Labor Day is a time to honor work, specifically plain and simple hard work, the kind of work that keeps this country going. Labor Day is also a time to honor and remember all those workers who fought for and are still fighting for the rights of workers. This year, Labor Day has an added dimension because of the worldwide pandemic. This year, we need to especially remember the frontline workers in this pandemic. You know who they are. Some of them we hear a lot about, others not so much. But healthcare workers, postal carriers, grocery store and drugstore and gas station employees who show up day after day to make sure that we have access to essential products such as food and medicine. And these folks are not particularly well paid. And when was the last time that you said thank you to any of them? In the opening words, Reverend Martha Valentin wrote, "We call into our presence this hour our ancestors, whose labor, love, and commitment made it possible for us to be here now." And she speaks of the table of abundance. What abundance? Perhaps she refers to the endless supply of abundance of love and compassion that we all have within us, whether we tap into it or not, or even whether we recognize it is there or not. The abundance of love and compassion is lacking when there is right to work opposition to unions. Did you know that the first right to work campaign happened in the 1930s when the Christian American Association called President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal plan to give people work, quote, a Jewish plot, and organized labor a threat to Jim Crow segregation, warning that unions would force white and black workers into alliance. This anti-union crusade became associated with freedom, and unions were attacked for taking away the God-given freedom of the right to work, at least according to militant right-wing groups. Yes, work is essential to our well-being. I am not sure that it is a God-given right. I am sure that taking advantage of workers and forbidding them to organize is wrong and often leads to civil unrest. How do we stand in solidarity with workers? How do we create civil rest to counter civil unrest? To achieve a truly civil society, won't we have to find a balance between rugged individualism and communal living? Individualism versus communalism. Communalism, in the best sense of the word, means group solidarity. I'm not using it in the sense of dictionary definition, loyalty to a socio-political grouping based on religious or ethnic affiliation. Won't we have to achieve civility through solidarity? And how do we act in solidarity with each other? How do we build solidarity with others, especially with those whom we disagree? How do we sustain solidarity, and how do we pass it on to coming generations? Dictionary.com gives only 3 short definitions of solidarity. 1, union or fellowship arising from common responsibilities and interests. An example, to promote solidarity among union members. 2, community of feelings, purposes, and so on. And 3, community of responsibilities and interests. Sounds suspiciously like a church to me. Closely connected to the individual versus community debate is this society's insistence on defining life in terms of winning or losing, framing everything in those terms. For most of us, our first experience of building a civil society, or not, happens in our families of origin. If you are a firstborn child, you may have struggled with civility when a sibling entered your life. You had your territory staked out. You had the undivided attention of your parents or caregivers. And then another being entered your world and completely upset it. You had to discover sometimes painfully, what living in community means. And how many of you have ever lived in a dormitory? I am not sure if it is entirely possible to maintain a civil society in that setting. You know that fairly recently I have stayed in dorms at the bottom of the Grand Canyon at Phantom Ranch, and there's always at least one person. These are 12 beds. At least one person who does not seem to grasp the concept of sharing, of taking turns, of being aware of other beings. A covenant could be useful, I believe, in this setting. Maybe I'll write one, a Phantom Ranch dormitory covenant. One of the chapters in Karen Armstrong's book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, is titled, How Should We Speak to One Another? It is also the 8th step in her 12-step program. Karen Armstrong is one of the leading theologians of our times. There's a website associated with this book, charterforcompassion.org, which I hope you will take time to visit. Charterforcompassion, no spaces, .org. Might this congregation consider signing that Charter for Compassion? How should we speak to one another? Well, not the way we have been over the past several years. Yes, there has been incivility in this country since its founding. Political brawls, name-calling, but I would argue not at this level. It might help us to remember, though, that we have a history of incivility in politics. In 1800, an election year, a newspaper from that time said that, quote, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed. The soil will be soaked with blood, and the nation black with crimes, if Thomas Jefferson won the presidency, which of course he did. And this from the 1828 campaign. Andrew Jackson, general and war hero, was accused of being a cannibal. The bloodthirsty Jackson began again to show his cannibal propensities, a pamphlet of that time proclaimed. Jackson, too, won. Karen Armstrong gives us 2 words to guide us in our conversations with others: dialogue and compassion. Dialogue and compassion. Socrates, Plato, the Buddhists, Jesus all believed that while we have the truths that we need to build a civil society within ourselves, we have those truths. It is compassionate dialogue that will help us in the process of self-discovery to draw out these truths. Armstrong has done considerable work in the area of interfaith dialogue and cooperation, especially since 9/11. She believes that we can understand terrorists, not condone or excuse what they do, but understand the reasons for their actions, which can be a starting point for compassionate dialogue. She gives an example of how to understand that which is alien and or incomprehensible to us. She describes how Jewish scholars living in the time period around 30 BCE, before the Common Era, and up to about 45 CE, Common Era, so roughly about the time Jesus lived, scholars trained in Greek philosophy approached the Torah. These scholars did not dismiss the texts because they were, or seemed to be, especially on first readings, barbaric. Rather, the scholars were able to interpret them in a way that fit with the then current times. And how did they do that? Why didn't they just give up on those ancient texts? Because the Jewish scholars made what Armstrong calls a charitable assumption. And the charitable assumption was that these ancient Hebrew texts, however strange they seemed to the Jews trying to interpret them hundreds of years later, the scholars made the charitable assumption that the authors of the texts were human beings, just like them, with human needs and wants, desires and frustrations, joys and concerns. If you want to engage in an interesting mental exercise, try having a dialogue in your head with an imaginary person or persons you can't imagine ever talking to in real life. For example, how about someone from the Michigan Liberty Militia? I recently read an interview with such a person, and the militiaman told the interviewer that the only rights we have as humans are individual rights. In other words, there's no such thing as communal rights. And the interviewer then asked this man why he felt he had to defend with a gun this country, the United States, from any government that wanted to take away any of his rights. And in this particular case, the militiaman was taking part in anti-lockdown protests. He'd been part of the protests where the militia went into the state capitol in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and went to the governor's office and tried to get her to come out. Well, this militiaman said to the interviewer, because these individual rights are God-given. There was no questioning them. They were God-given. Well, I know what I would like to say to that man in my imaginary conversation. What about the teachings in all the major religions and most of what we might call minor ones? What about the teachings that we are to take care of the hungry, the sick, the homeless, the outcasts? Or what would you say to the Phelps family? Remember them? Known for appearing at military funerals to loudly proclaim their anti-gay beliefs. Did you know that they were at a memorial service for Fred Rogers? Yes, gentle, kind, sweet Mr. Rogers. The Phelps family made a lot of noise there, saying, among other things, that Mr. Rogers was gay, and many of the signs that they were holding said, Mr. Rogers is in hell. For every incident of incivility, what should the reaction of those who want civil rest be? Civility is often met with incivility, but it works the other way around too. The protesters at Fred Rogers' memorial service, it's one example of civility being met with incivility, but here's one of the other way around. A response to the killings of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, George Floyd, and on and on and on. One response, one very civil response, has been the creation of the Center for Policing Equity. You may never have heard of that. You should be reading Yes Magazine. Put a little infomercial in here. The Center for Policing Equity. Philip Goff happens to be the head of this center, and he says we are going to have to imagine a world that hasn't existed yet. One that affords Black people the full dignity of humanity in the country in which they reside. Imagination is critical to creating civil rest. The new abolitionists understand this need for creativity and imagination and solidarity. And if you look them up on the internet, or those two words, the new abolitionists, you'll have a hard time finding what they're about. But theirs is yet another response to the civil unrest we are experiencing. They want to reimagine what policing is, end mass incarceration, spend money on mental health, not on militarization of local police forces. The Center for Policing Equity and the New Abolitionists and Karen Armstrong and many, many others make excellent arguments for responding to injustice without hatred and contempt. Gandhi often asked people engaged in social justice work to think about whether they were fighting to change things or to punish. We can learn to be firm in our convictions without falling into self-righteousness or the same kind of intolerance that we are arguing against. We can learn to express our deeply held beliefs without letting our ego get bigger and bigger. If only politicians, well, never mind. Use your imagination. This brings me back to what I said earlier about the balance between rugged individualism and community or communalism. To achieve a truly civil society, what we have to find a balance between them. Individualism versus communalism, and we're so out of balance in this country. We have to get beyond rugged individualism, not for the sake only of humanity, but for the sake of the rest of creation. We have to figure out how to get closer to following the ideals of the Haudenosaunee people, aka the Iroquois. They tried to live in a way that would ensure not only their children's future, but the futures of 7 generations out from their own. I would like to hear some dialogue about this concept in the upcoming presidential campaign. Who cares about creating a civil society within and through our political system? Who cares about civil rest? The National Institute for Civil Discourse does. NICD, and I'll bet you've never heard of them either. This is a fascinating organization formed in May of 2011 in response to the shooting in January of that year in Tucson, Arizona, where Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and several others were either killed or wounded. Gabby Gifford lived, as you probably know. The NICD is a nonpartisan organization that works to promote healthy and civil political debate. Look it up. The NICD, the National Institute for Civil Discourse, believes that people can have very different values and political preferences, but can still discuss these differences in a civil manner. Here are the NICD's research goals. There are only 3 of them at the moment. 1, what is the nature and what are the causes and consequences of incivility? 2, what are the leverage points for doing something about political dysfunction? And 3, what are the things that can be done to change the current political dysfunction? And the NICD has a golden rule for the year 2020, and here it is: a call for dignity and respect in politics. Phew. Against such amazing, scary odds, a call for dignity and respect in politics. Examples of how to move towards a truly civil society are all around us. Sometimes you have to go looking for them. There's the National Institute for Civil Discourse, restorative justice programs, journalists such as David Haynes, who wrote in A Confident America, we have a basic faith in one another. We question each other's ideas vigorously, but we don't question each other's motives. Despite all the reasons to be pessimistic and gloomy about what is happening in our culture and our society right now, there are just as many reasons, if not more, to be optimistic and to continue to work towards civility. And to remember the question Stephen Hawking asked, what makes humans unique? He answered the question this way: transcending limits. And he said we limit ourselves with hate, war, jealousy, fear, any number of things, all of which lead to uncivil societies. But we are always, always capable of transcending these limits. Dialogue, compassion, covenant, good foundations for building a civil society, aka civil rest. Armstrong reminds us that Socrates and Plato, for them, dialogue was a spiritual exercise designed to produce a profound psychological change in the participants. The purpose was that each person should understand the depth of his or her ignorance. So if they understood the depth of their own ignorance, there was no way that anybody could win. There was no way that anybody could win, because the dialogue isn't supposed to be won. Plato said that dialogue is communal meditation. Communal meditation. It is hard work and requires a great expense of time and trouble. If dialogue required a great expense of time and trouble in his day, how much more difficult is it in our day? In addition, Plato was adamant that dialogue be conducted in a kindly, compassionate manner, supposedly his words. It was crucial that questions and answers be exchanged in good faith and without malice. Here is my favorite instruction from Plato on what to do when engaged in dialogue. Each person must make a place for the other in his or her mind, listening carefully and sympathetically to the ideas of the other person or people and allowing them to unsettle his or her own convictions. We have to make a place for the other in our mind, listening carefully and sympathetic and allowing the ideas of that other person to unsettle our own convictions. And of course, when the roles of listener and speaker switch, then the same instructions apply. You can do the simplest of things to begin a civil dialogue with others. Let yourself be vulnerable. Jason King, in his article, The Theology of Mr. Rogers, in the magazine Catholic Moral Theology, wrote, Fred saw in vulnerability not a weakness to be hidden, but an openness for relationships, an opportunity for solidarity. You can do the simplest of things to help create civil rest and counter civil unrest. You can smile. A couple of days ago, I heard the song Smile on the radio. Then you're going to say, but I can't tell if anybody's smiling because they have masks on. You can tell. You can tell by the eyes. I had not heard that song in years, at least not consciously at any rate. And the version that I heard a couple days ago was sung by Nat King Cole from 2006. I knew that he had recorded that song, and it was a particular favorite of my mother's. What I did not know was that Charlie Chaplin wrote the lyrics. Who was Charlie Chaplin, some of you will be asking? Well, he wrote the lyrics many, many years ago. Charlie Chaplin, look him up, was a film star, a silent film star, but he was certainly famous in, when were silent films? 1920s? A little earlier, maybe? We are all connected. You can practice civility and meaningful civil conversations right here within this faith community, even if you have to do it on Zoom. And to begin the conversation, smile. You won't have your masks on when you're on Zoom. Smile. Though your heart is aching, smile. Even though it's breaking, smile through your fear and sorrow. You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. Now, it's not that simple. And if that sounds sappy and too sentimental for a crisis of the magnitude we are facing, I say, get over it. We need help from wherever we can find it. You can exercise your imagination muscles anytime, anywhere, and you can envision civil rest and believe that wonders still the world shall witness, which just happens to be the title of the closing hymn. So sing it out. You should, most of you, recognize the tune.
the extinguishing of the chalice. As we extinguish this chalice, we pledge to walk together in the ways of truth and affection as best we know them now, or learn them in days to come, that we and our children may be fulfilled, and that we may speak to the world in words and actions of peace and goodwill.
The closing words are by Unitarian Universalist minister Barbara Peskin. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, and to bow to the mystery. May it be so. Blessed be all men. Go in peace and in love.